It's the Beaver Banter Podcast. CJ Baumgartner with my co-host Ian Rivers. Ian, another great day to be a Beavers. We talk about all the latest in Bemidji State and, of course, playing in the CCHA. There's been some kind of shockwaves throughout the conference, Ian. Of course, we touched on it last week on Twitter because as soon as we got done recording a podcast, some pretty big news happened hockey-wise.
Yeah, it was probably about 15 minutes or so after we ended the recording, that Mankato, well, actually, Wisconsin hired head coach Mike Hastings from Minnesota State Mankato away from the program. So that's kind of big news, and it really didn't spark any major changes other than, of course, your head coach who's been there for, I think they made it 8 of the last 11 years to the NCAA tournament. Obviously, they were in a championship game just a couple seasons ago. Well, last season still technically, at least for another couple days. But yeah, and then coming up to yesterday, it's really gotten worse for them. And I'm scrolling through, I'm trying to find the exact list of everybody that's departed because I know that they posted it. For sure, the ones that are transferring out, that have just recently entered the transfer portal. Christian Fitzgerald joins Simon Tassi, David Cilia, and Bennett Zamolik in the transfer portal. And that's not including all of the coaches that they've lost and all the pro contract guys that they've lost. They have basically an entire new roster that they're going to have to be working with next year outside of a couple of guys. So that's kind of big news for the CCHA, the team that's won 6 straight McNaughton Cups, going to be working with a little bit of an overhaul. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like the death of Maverick hockey. They still have it's still a hockey hotbed. Obviously, they've had the success. Their fan base is one of the best in the country, if not, for sure the conference. So they're going to be able to probably find a coach. Will they have the same level of success, especially after all these guys are leaving? I mean, we're talking about Christian Fitzgerald, who was in the Rookie of the Year running in the CCHA. He was almost a first-team All-CCHA guy for the rookie team, I should say. And then you got guys like Bennett Zamolik, who was apparently going to be a top 4 defenseman for them next season. And then David Cilia. I forget, was he the Player of the Year in the CCHA? The Forward of the Year? I
Good
thought he
question.
was. I could be misstepping, but
I'll look it up here.
I'm pretty sure he was. And so they're losing a lot of firepower. And as a program like them, you're kind of used to that year to year. You've got good players and they're staying and they're seniors and then they leave. But usually they have guys behind them that can kind of step in. This is kind of a mass exodus for them. So it'll be interesting to see. And
Pietila was the player of the year.
Oh, of course, Pietila was overall, but I'm sure forward of the year probably was Cilia. So my mistake there. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting now going into next season because it's kind of like I'm a Chargers fan, right? And I'm never going to pick the Chargers to win the division until I watch the Chiefs lose the division. Like, I don't care how much they didn't improve or whatever you can say, they're going to win it until it's kind of like the Packers. You guys are probably sitting most years, well, they got Rodgers still. And so there's still Mankato. And until I see them start to falter, even this year, we saw them falter and then they picked it back up in the second half of the season when we at Bemidji State were kind of crumbling and they got back to that 6th in a row. So, but I think it's going to open up the conference entirely. And if Bemidji State can get their ducks in a row, I think that they could contend seriously for a championship next season in the CCHA. If you're looking at regression to the mean to a certain extent, you're looking at all those games where we gave up goals in the last 2 minutes of a game. And you're saying if we can clean that up a little bit, I mean, that's a lot of points that we left on the table. And God only knows what happens if we clean up some of those points. Do we play with more confidence going forward because, we're in a better spot now? I don't know what the butterfly effect looks like on that, but it's definitely something that you would hope next season can get cleaned up. And if they can do that and get some of these good guys in that are coming in as freshmen, it'll be fun.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it from a Bemidji State perspective too, even if Bemidji State comes in towards the end, the second half of that season, even a little more healthy, how does that change? the landscape of things towards the end of the year. But with Mankato, it's a really fascinating situation because, of course, Hastings had been linked to the Wisconsin job for some time. And everybody's kind of like, well, he's not actually going to leave. Like, why would he want to leave? Like, it's, he's got the program in a good spot. They're basically running the CCHA. And yeah, pretty much, Ian, it comes down to money because, and not only that coming down to money with Hastings, also the name escapes me, but the top assistant who is expected to replace Hastings is
Not. I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Not.
yes. And did Lucas of Beaver territory point out a Bemidji connection with that? I can't remember.
Um, he might have. I can go check his Twitter.
But the point is he's not coming back either. And that's got to be to money too, because you're turning down MSU wanted to give him the head coaching job. And he said, no, I'm going to go be his top assistant in Wisconsin. And they're going to pay him top dollar. All those Wisconsin taxpayer dollars are going into Mike Hastings, Not, and Luke Fickle, apparently. So it's a blow to not just MSU, but the CCHA in terms of hockey because the Big Ten got better. You theoretically get worse, especially with all the players transferring out, and it leaves a power vacuum in the CCHA. And again, we've talked about this already. Can the Beavers capitalize? Obviously, Michigan Tech's still going to be around. Northern Michigan had a good last season. Bowling Green's always there. St. Thomas is going to get better. Augustana's on the way. There's a power vacuum in the conference. So does Michigan Tech take it? Can BSU get themselves into that upper echelon of maybe not winning it every year, but just being in constant competition for a top spot instead of maybe that 3 to 5 range? It's going to be fascinating how BSU fills that void that's left now, because like you said, they're still going to be around, but at the same time, it might take them a little bit to kind of pick up the pieces and figure things out.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think they're going to fall into like the bottom half of the conference or anything like that because they still have such a good infrastructure there. Obviously, that's crumbled now. Losing the coach is like the biggest piece of the puzzle.
And a lot of the
Because
staff.
Yeah, because a lot of times guys will commit not to the program as much anymore as they will to the coach. And then once that coach leaves, a lot of the guys, they came there to play for the coach. And so they end up dipping out as well. You brought up Todd Knott. He was a former Beaver player and a current Maverick assistant, Todd Knott. And then, because Lucas, he brought up Mankato will most likely promote former Beaver player and current Maverick assistant coach Todd Knott to head coach. And then just a couple days later, it was announced that he declined the opportunity to become the Mavericks head coach. And I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but I think he's following Hastings to Wisconsin.
You could say that the Mankato was never quite able to tie the knot.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
I think Bemidji's always been one of those teams that they get a good recruiting class once every like 4 years or so that really stands out above the rest. And then once that class comes to fruition, they have a run at the CCHA title. You saw that in 2016-17, and you saw that a little bit in 1920 as they were right there. I went up to the games against Mankato. If they would have swept Mankato that weekend, last weekend of the regular season, they would have won the McNaughton Cup. They won Friday night, lost Saturday night, ended up losing to Mankato by 2 points, I believe, in the standings. And then, of course, we all know that the tournament was canceled that season anyways. But either way, they were still right there. And then, of course, we know that then the season after that, they weren't necessarily in a position to win the conference because of the dominance of Mankato that year, but they still did make a tournament run. And that was partially due to some of the guys that were able to come back and play for a 5th season. But I think that we see this now. We've got this good freshman class, at least in the forward category, and we saw some good flashes from the freshman defenders as well. We'll see where it goes, but hopefully we're retooling at the right time because this is going to be a big opportunity with Mankato down to kind of smell blood in the water and make your mark on the conference.
And now with all those players transferring out, obviously they can go anywhere. So likely maybe they go to the NCHC, maybe they go to the Big Ten, maybe they find a spot somewhere else in the CCHA. But Ian, with all of those recruits that are hitting the portal and all these players that are hitting the portal, is there a chance Bemidji State, we don't have any inside sources, but is there like a gut level feeling? Is there a position of need where if you're Sartori, you're just maybe putting a phone call out?
Possibly. The only one that you could say has connection would be Bennett Smolek because he is the younger brother of Will and Reese, who did play at MSU before he went to I believe he's in the NHL or maybe the AHL right now. But some of these guys like Fitzgerald, maybe he feels like that would be kind of a step back for his career, going from Moorhead, who's consistently winning conference titles and making the tournament. Maybe he feels like he could get a spot on an NCHC team or maybe somewhere in the Big Ten. And then guys like Cilia as well. If you're winning fresh or forward of the year in the conference, you're probably not going to go to a second level team in the conference. Maybe. I mean, we don't know, but I'm thinking for a lot of these guys, and everybody's assuming like, oh, they're just going to go to Wisconsin and follow Hastings. Like, no, Wisconsin already has guys in place. So not every one of those guys, there might be one of them that does do that, but not every one of those guys is going to go to Wisconsin. Off the top of my head, I would say the best chance we have is to get a guy like Bennett Smolik, just because of the family ties there to BSU. And, we did lose three senior defensemen this year. So that would be definitely something we could look forward to in the transfer portal. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this is going to be the most volatile that Mankato has been, maybe that I can remember ever since the old, splitting of the Big Ten and WCHA. Even that year that Bemidji won the conference, Mankato didn't necessarily have a down year. It was just the dominance of Bemidji. They got out won 13 games in a row in the conference to start that season, and nobody really had a chance to catch up to them. But so even that season they weren't that weak. It was just kind of a down year for them, up year for Bemidji. But I think, like we said, we've talked about it. They're going to be fine. Like, they're going to be okay. Worst case scenario, they become kind of a Bemidji State until they can get that next coach in place, where they're kind of off and on, but they're still kind of competing at the top of the conference. But I really don't think the good news for them right now is there's not really a team outside of Michigan Tech that's been up at the top of the conference super consistently. Bemidji for the past couple of years, 6 or 7 now, has been a top half team of the conference. Maybe the worst finish we have is like 5th, you know what I mean? And that's a down year for us. So that's kind of a good thing for Bemidji to hang their hat on, but really the best team, in terms of prolonged success at the top of the conference has been Michigan Tech. So they're probably the favorites going forward. Blake Pietila, will he come back? Will he not? It looks like he might, but that's going to be something to monitor. But yeah, mass hysteria in Mankato right now. And I'm looking at all the reactions on Twitter and everywhere else, and you can tell that Mankato has not had too much bad news break for them in the last 10 years, because they're just handling it terribly. So
you hate to see it. You really do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really, I can't remember who it was. Somebody commented this is, I think, overall a net negative for the CCHA. Just having good players in the conference, all these good players are going to be leaving the conference. That's a bad thing for the conference. And I'm like, it depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at it from a national perspective, yes, Mankato not being good for the conference, being able to get 2 teams in like we did this year is probably a negative. But for the rest of the conference, looking at it saying, wow, they've won 6 years in a row, I don't necessarily think this is a big negative that they're going to be taking a step back.
Right.
And but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be Mankato having to step back to the competition. It should be the competition trying to get up towards where Mankato is, and nobody other than maybe Michigan Tech, like I said, has been able to get anywhere close to that yet. So hopefully some of these CCHA teams can really step it up. And we see some good buildings being put in, like St. Thomas and Augustana have big plans to make good looking new arenas. So maybe the future of the conference is on the up and up. But we'll see. It's definitely a story that's ever unfolding over the last 48 hours in Mankato.
Yeah, it's been a trip for them down in southern Minnesota, and it'll be interesting to see who they get to replace him, because again, hockey is very incestuous in how they want to hire coaches. So gonna guess it's probably just a guy from the state of Minnesota somewhere, and we'll see what that ends up being, whether it's a guy on a staff, whether it's wherever they go. It'll just be interesting, because they'll probably have to hire from outside the university, but at the same time, you're going to hire somebody from inside Minnesota, and it's pretty well documented when you look at St. Cloud State and the Gophers and just kind of the coaching searches, even in Bemidji State, they all come from one of the other Minnesota programs. So that'll be probably just my off color. I have no idea kind of guess. But speaking of hockey, let's talk quickly about the Frozen Four, which is in Tampa of all places. What a great week for the Gophers and Gopher fans to get out of this place we call a state, this frozen wasteland. Gophers, Michigan, Boston University, and Quinnipiac. Ian, what's your takedown?
Man, I really don't know. I will say this is when everybody complains about the Frozen Four being somewhere that hockey is not necessarily like a hotbed, especially college hockey. This is why. Like people in Minnesota right now are not complaining, "Oh my gosh, we had to go to Tampa." No, they're probably pretty happy to get out of here.
You'll get a lot of fans
Even
that travel for that reason.
Oh yeah, I've seen plenty of people already, taking their flights down there. And I'm sure it goes for people in Connecticut and Boston and Ann Arbor. So it's probably the same everywhere. But I really don't know what to make of this, man. I've seen a lot of experts picking Minnesota to win against Boston U. And then the Michigan Quinnipiac game is a little bit more split, but it's mostly Michigan. And that would be, as a partial Gophers fan, like I said, kind of terrifying to see that rematch for the sixth time. I believe it would be this season, because every game has been like a 1-goal game. At least the last 3 have. So I think Michigan is more talented offensively than Quinnipiac, but I believe his name is Yanni Peretz is the goalie for Quinnipiac. He is very good in net. And that's the thing. All these teams have really good goalies. Peretz is one that gained some national respect this year. But Portillo for Michigan, close for Minnesota, and then Comesso for BU. All of these goalies are very battle tested at this point. There's not a bad team left in this competition. 3 1 seeds and a 2 seed, and the 2 seed was the number 5 overall seed. So barely on that line. It's going to be a really good competition. And I would say I favor the Gophers if I was an outsider looking in, but knowing the way that it goes and the word, I guess they'll probably have a block M on the front of their jersey, but you know what I'm saying. The word on the front of the jersey is Minnesota, and that means they're probably not the favorite in any championship to go forward. But we'll see. I mean, they've got the best line in college hockey between Nyes, Snuggerud, and Cooley. Those are two finalists for the Hobie Baker Award, which will be announced about probably 48 hours from now on Friday. And the other one is playing in the other semifinal, which is Michigan's Adam Fantilli. So it's gonna be fun to watch. As a fan of one of the teams, it will probably be not fun to watch. I'll be on the edge of my seat all game, but from a pure hockey perspective, I don't expect either of these games to be blowouts. There might be some pretty good offense, maybe some 5-4 games, but I truly do believe that if Michigan can get to 3 goals, I think that gives them a good chance to beat Quinnipiac. Minnesota, it's going to be, can they get out front early and not have to kind of chase the game? Because that's when they've gotten in trouble this year, when they've had to chase games. And, they've got plenty of comebacks too, because they've done it all. I mean, they're one of the best teams in the country for a reason. But there's no team like, some years where you look at it and it's like, wow, how did these teams, we just saw in basketball. How did Florida Atlantic get here in San Diego State? There's none of those kind of outliers that had middling seasons, or, not middling, but for 1 seeds to be there. It's going to be a blue blood clash. All these programs have plenty of history, and it'll be entertaining to watch, to say the least.
All right, Frozen Four predictions. What are you going with?
I say with zero confidence. I picked it at the start of the tournament, and I'm going to stick with it. It's Minnesota and Michigan playing for the championship game, and I'm going to say that Minnesota gets over the hump. I think they're going to have a chip on their shoulder, knowing that Michigan won the Big Ten championship in the tournament, and they're going to come out and play, and it's going to be a really good game in the championship. But I think it's going to be 1-goal games pretty much everywhere. Maybe, it's hard to call a 1-goal game in hockey because a lot of times there's an empty netter at the end of it that makes it a 2-goal game. But you get what I'm saying. It's going to be close all the way up till the end in every game this weekend. But I think Minnesota, Michigan, and then I'm saying with zero confidence, Minnesota wins the national championship.
Well, yeah, I think I'll lean with you in on that one. Very cautiously optimistic that the Gophers can get it done. One, because just screw East Coast hockey. And second of all, no to Michigan. So we'll go internally here. I know this is a Bemidji State podcast, but it's not it's not the Mavs. It's not even St. Cloud State. I can lean into the Gophers a little bit on this one.
Well, the one thing I will say about the Gophers' chances this year is that teams in the past, they've been so skill based and skill oriented, and they've came up against teams like Mankato, who play a completely different style of hockey than they do, and they're very, I think, lucky that they were able to avoid Mankato this season and that St. Cloud State was able to beat them, because the CCHA plays a specific brand of hockey that if the team is good enough and the coaching is good enough, like it was under Hastings, that's what really gets the Gophers in trouble. And I'm not an expert on Hockey East and how they play, what their style is, but I think BU matches closer to what a St. Cloud State is as opposed to what Mankato's style of hockey is. And again, I don't have a lot of expertise in Hockey East. It's probably my least watched conference of all the conferences, just because the streaming stuff, and it's hard to watch some of those East Coast games without the New England Sports Network. But so I think that this bodes well. And this team for the Minnesota Gophers, it's definitely got more of a chippy, tough attitude than the ones I've seen in the past. You've got those top line guys. I mean, Cooley's not afraid to get his hands dirty. I mean, this guy's he's a third overall pick in last year's NHL draft, and he's in there chipping and John with everybody. So I think they've got a little bit more of a toughness and grit to them than years past. I think that's the one thing that kind of benefits this team over years past.
Well, and you mentioned the different styles of hockey and the different play, and it just always brings me back to Bemidji State's win over Wisconsin in the tournament a couple years ago, and that's kind of the blueprint for how the smaller schools can beat the bigger schools. Is like you said, just a more team-based approach when the coaching's on point, everybody's kind of meshing together versus star individual performances. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about women's hockey, Ian. There's an article that just came out in the Bemidji Pioneer recently. I don't see if there's a date on this article here that I have in front of me. Looks like it was this morning that was in the Bemidji Pioneer, and it was Bemidji State head women's hockey coach Jim Scanlan talking about the transfer portal and talking about just what a gut punch this has been. So I'm going to read you some quotes from Scanlan, and I just want you to give me your reaction to them. So he talks about the transfer portal and how 6 Beavers opted to find new teams to finish their college hockey careers. He said, unfortunately, this is our reality. This is the world we live in right now. It's definitely a challenging situation. Of course, the biggest one they lost was Reese Hunt, who transferred, of course, sophomore defenseman Ella Anik and Taylor Larson threw their names into the ring. Sophomore forward Claire Vekic, a junior goaltender Hannah Hogginson, and sophomore defenseman Adriana Vandalist also joined the list of teammates in search of new homes, according to the Bemidji Pioneer article. Here's another quote among Scanlan. He said, "It's their right. It's disappointing, but I respect their decision. I wish them the best of luck going forward. Our focus is on the future. We have a group of 6 incoming players. We've certainly reached out to players in the portal. There are spots we need to fill, and we're working hard to fill that." And of course, he mentions that about the COVID-19 year, about the 5th year, some of those seniors still having their eligibility. Said COVID changed everything. He says he thinks a lot of the initial transfers were 5th year players looking for an opportunity to play, because in the women's game, of course, there's no pro hockey, there's no minor league system to go to, so that benefited a little bit. Ian, just there's a couple more quotes here, but what's your instant reaction to some of these words from Scanlan in the Pioneer?
Well, is there not pro hockey for the women now? I'm pretty sure over the last couple of years it's been integrated, at least
There
at
is,
some level.
yeah.
It's probably not even like as big as like the WNBA, but I know that like the Minnesota Whitecaps, I think they
Yeah,
were just playing for a championship like last weekend.
it's
But
small,
yes,
but
very
yeah,
small, probably not even you probably I think I could be wrong. We might have had at one point a Whitecaps player that worked at a bar here in our small town Maple Lake.
yeah.
But she had to have a bartending job on the side still because
Well, and that's the thing, is it's probably
it's not a
small enough to where, you're like, how serious do you want to make it if you can't make a living off of it? And I wonder if that
exactly. So
goes into
I
part
get
of it.
that. Initial reactions, yeah, it sounds like he's a bit upset because of how the transferring is, affecting his program. He's got a good point. part of what I loved about college athletics, getting into watching it and following it, is you watch players commit to your university, and you were so used to being able to watch people just grow as a human being and as an athlete over the course of their 4 years there. And now I just saw something on Twitter where somebody got super excited because somebody posted on Instagram running it back. And I can't remember if it was like MSU basketball, Michigan State, that is. And he was made a comment. He's like, how weird is it that now we're getting excited to just see that players are actually coming back next season and not leaving all the time? And it's just a weird landscape that we're in. And I do think it will slow down a little bit, like Lucas has talked about with us, when that extra year of eligibility fades away. But I still think, if you don't want players to transfer out, you probably shouldn't go 5-30 or whatever it was that we went. And that's, it's probably not all on coaching. It's probably because of, players as well. But as a whole, you probably just shouldn't expect about a bunch of people to stick around when you win 15% of your games. That's probably not the real number, but you get what I'm saying. It's not a good number of games that you won this year. And most of them were in the early part of the season. I think they had 3 of their wins before like Thanksgiving this year. And then after that, it's a couple wins against, I think it was Mankato and St. Thomas each. So definitely not a great spot for the program to be in. Hopefully they can rebound and just get some fresh blood in here. Some, girls that are excited to play Bemidji State hockey and have, better luck getting some more to stick around next year. Cause like you said, we talked about how young this team was and how the future's looking good because we only had 3 seniors, but doesn't matter if you only have 3 seniors when you have 6 people and pretty important people, especially with Vekic, I believe is how her last name is pronounced, and then Hoganson, the goaltender as well. Once those players leave, it gets tough to keep fielding teams year after year when your top players are just using you as a springboard basically to bigger programs.
Right. And so here's a couple more quotes from Scanlan. He says, "You're always keeping an eye on the portal. When the portal came into effect, it was new to all of us. You're given a password to get onto the portal, and all of a sudden you hear of these players popping up that they are looking to move schools. You check it every single day." So for those who don't know, the portal is you basically just put yourself on a website and it just says this person is in the transfer portal, and then coaches now have the opportunity to reach out to you. At least that's how it's understood to me.
That's weird. If that's actually true, I've never even
It's
thought about it as just like a literal, like something you just,
it's like a
yeah, I gotta
Facebook feed. You're
log
just
in.
constantly refreshing it. Like, did anybody enter the portal?
It makes sense if that's actually it, but it feels like it's such a formal thing. You know what I mean? Like it feels
Right.
like you gotta call the NCAA up and say, hey, I'm entering my name in this portal. And then you've got scouts for every team that are looking at the portal. I thought it would have been more of like I said, a formal thing.
Right. And so he says every team has their needs, every team has their wants. You're just going to look at the players based on what you're looking for, based on your needs. Anytime there are spots open and roles open, there are opportunities for returning players and incoming players. That's kind of always been the message in college athletics. You're always going to have that cycle. You have kids graduate, you bring in new groups with the portal. You can see that turnover be more than you originally planned than just your senior class. That's for all sports. That's not just a hockey thing. So that's all of what Scanlan had to say. Nothing too groundbreaking, obviously, like you said, Ian, just kind of the normal frustrations of a coach. You just kind of put a team together, and even though they didn't win, like you're trying to grow them, and all of a sudden it's being ripped out from the root before it even has a chance to bloom. So yeah, it's not a great spot for Bemidji State women's hockey, but again, the portal giveth and the portal taketh away. So we'll see how it transpires.
Yeah, and I think the main discrepancy, like we've talked about, every school has the ability to utilize the portal, but it's so much different if you're looking at like the men's hockey side. On Minnesota's example, you're getting guys that had great seasons at smaller programs that want to transfer to your school because they had a great year. And for Bemidji State, you're looking at maybe right now a lot of guys that would be like, yeah, I just had a down year. I played in the smaller like Atlantic Hockey League, like Mitchell Martin did, and you're going to say I had a good year for that league, and I want to take a little bit of a step up, go to a team that wants me. But a lot of times you'll be getting guys kind of on the downswing for these smaller programs. So it's a lot different how it works. Both examples of universities can use the portal, but for a smaller school in the women's hockey scene, especially like Bemidji State, it's got to be a little frustrating.
All right, one last non-spring sports thing, and then we'll touch on some of that here. Ian, we talked about Bemidji State needing to fill a football game, considering Upper Iowa just bounced from the NSIC. Basically, in about a month, they'll be gone officially. So it opens up a game, I believe, on October 7th. And wouldn't you know it, Angelo State, who Bemidji State played in the NCAA tournament in the second round down in San Angelo, they all of a sudden had a team just quit playing football. They suspended their
Yes,
football
Simon
program
Fraser
and
suspended their football team, so now they have
an opening
an
on the
opening.
schedule. And it's the same day. So, Ian, no inside sources. We're just completely speculating here. If you're in the athletics department at Bemidji State, are you making that call and saying like, hey, let's work out a deal, let's get a football game played?
It depends. It's absolutely, it makes sense because you just played them. It would be a reason for fans to come out for that game. And it would be great for your strength of schedule, assuming, win or lose that game. Angelo State's probably going to be a top 10
They'll be up
team,
there.
top 15 team when you play them, as long as their expectations are where they're, used to being. And so it just depends on whether or not you're trying to find kind of a cupcake because you've already got, like we talked about, kind of a tougher schedule this coming season. So do you want to add a cupcake or do you really want to add another really tough team in there, especially once October comes around? And like I think we talked about, most of those games later in the season are against a little bit tougher opponents. So it's definitely something they could do, especially because both of the bye weeks do line up. So I think why not throw them on the schedule and get a good barometer of how your team is compared to other teams outside the NSIC.
Well, and like you said, it offers up a better strength of schedule because Bemidji State doesn't have particularly too tough. I mean, they have their tough teams, but an Upper Iowa wasn't exactly adding to your strength of schedule either, but at least gave you a win. So even if you don't win that game, it does look nice on the strength of schedule. Playing devil's advocate here, there's just a couple like logistical questions, like are you going down to Texas, or is Texas coming, or is Angelo State coming up here? And if you're Bemidji State, you're probably not taking a plane. You're probably busing down, although maybe you have to take a plane. But in terms of your travel budget, how does that factor in? So there's a couple like minor, not minor, but there's a couple things that maybe kind of fly under the radar when it comes to scheduling and working that out. At the same time, and of course, losing that game, even though it's against a really good team, it certainly could be held against you as well if you lose a game. But yeah, I still would like it to happen just in terms of getting a little bit of a rivalry going, because if Bemidji State's goals are where they're at and Angelo State's goals are where they're at, we could see them clash in the postseason again. So it'd just be a fun little matchup there, and to see that happen. So let's talk a little bit of spring sports, Ian. Bemidji State baseball is in the middle of a doubleheader right now against Winona State. They lost the first game 5-4, and right now, Ian, do you have the score pulled up at all? For I
Yeah,
believe.
it's bottom of the third now. We got out of the top of the third, and it is 7-0 Winona State over Bemidji State. So
All right, well,
not a great start so far, but I feel the bats are going to get hot here in the second half of this game.
yeah. All right, here we go. Ian's calling a shot. So looking at some other news from across the NSIC, of course, against Bemidji State, rather, NSIC conference play. Bemidji State resumes it in softball. They're going to Winona State and Upper Iowa for some clashes. Of course, they haven't played in the last couple weeks, just
They've had some games canceled,
because
let
of this. They
alone
were going to play them on
postponed.
Bemidji, I think, and then it was just too cold to even play them on the Chet.
I don't even know. I think the two series that have been canceled so far, the ones that were in Bemidji were postponed. The two that have been canceled are Northern State and Aberdeen, and Minot State, which is supposed to be tomorrow, or
Yeah,
sorry,
they're
April
probably
4th,
not playing with all
yesterday.
this snow that they just got.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So that's what my guess is that those are just canceled altogether because of the snow that they're going to get in the Dakotas over the course of yesterday and
pretty much.
tomorrow even.
Upper Iowa Spring Invite is happening for golf this weekend, but in terms of Bemidji State golf related news, for Bemidji State, Rylan Petrie got NSIC Golfer of the Week for a runner-up place at the Mule down at a golf tournament in Missouri. So congratulations to him. And I think, Ian, if we just, again, softball resuming their play, baseball, we talked about they're not in a great spot right now. I think their overall record on the season is 2-27. Just,
Yeah.
not ideal.
Not
And
where
I
you'd like
think
it to be.
that's going to do it. Maybe I'll get the softball record here, since they've been at least having a more solid start
They are
to
12-12, and I'm looking into the standings right now. They look, and again, it's not numbered, but it looks like they might be ninth in the NSIC right now. Of course, they've only played 2 conference games. Teams like Minnesota Duluth have played 8 already. So some of these games being canceled, I don't know how that works logistically.
they're gonna have to make them
When
up in a hurry. I think is basically
Yeah,
what's just gonna
I
have to
don't know
happen.
about that, but we'll see. Right now, sitting about middle of the pack in the conference, so not sure how the softball tournament works. If it's top 8 or like everybody makes it, I'm not sure, but definitely something to push for and hope to get into that tournament in, I believe, Rochester in early May.
This has been the Beaver Banter Podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner. That's my co-host Ian Rivers. We'll be back next week. Catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. Catch you guys next time.